There's a war. I think we're at war now.
A bit of a period of uncertainty that's going to happen.
There's no slow burn. It sort of happened so quickly.
Cost of living has gone up. Things are more expensive.
Over the next 6 to 12 months, we really see the impact of what's happening today.
The Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the oil goes through. Crazy lines at the petrol station, which everyone's probably seen.
For investors, they're going to really feel the impact.
Because nobody wins in war. You lose lives, the economies get wrecked.
Oh, Andrew, thanks for coming back for another episode of our podcast. A lot's happened, man. A lot's happened since our last one. It was only a month ago, and I just feel like everything's kicked off. There's a war. I think we're at war now.
Thank you for having me back. Yes, it's gone pretty nuts very, very quickly as well. So it's just interesting to see. There was a big buildup of US military across the Middle East. And he finally hit the button, coincidentally, right after the end of the Winter Olympics. Yeah,
interesting. I didn't actually think about that timing, but it's crazy. It's crazy because it's happened so quick. Usually, I don't know. Usually, I don't know if I can comment to other times there's been conflicts, but there's no slow burn. It sort of happened so quickly. So I don't know if we've seen the market's reaction yet. We've seen some initial conversations and chatter in the market about what's going to happen with inflation and rates and oil prices, but really we haven't seen it because it's probably going to be over the next 6 to 12 months. We really see the impact of what's happening today because it's happened so quick. You know what I mean?
Well, look, there's no doubt that Trump has lived by his word and he's gone really hard and really fast very quickly. I think that's sort of been his strategy, is to get ready and then just to hit him really hard to see if it knocks out the key assets. But who knows? There's a lot of speculation that Iran has a lot more military capacity than what they're letting on. And of course, they're tightening the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 20% of the oil goes through to come to the rest of the world. And when that happens, you see those crazy lines at the petrol station, which everyone's probably seen over the last few weeks. And it's like, I've seen lines that are 20, 30 deep because people are trying to get in to try and get cheaper petrol. That's is crazy. Nuts. It's like the toilet paper situation at COVID.
It's panic buying petrol.
What people don't get is you're going to fill up this week. You may have a car that lasts a week and a half. If you've got a hybrid, maybe 2 weeks. But then at some point, you will have to fill up again. So then what happens then?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's now time to invest in like a horse and carriage business, and that's what we're gonna have in the future. No, but it's so true. I saw out in regional, they're suffering heaps because for two reasons. Regional, a lot of travel, right? Like to go to the shops is like a 10-minute trip versus a 5-minute trip in Sydney. You know what I mean? And so, or sometimes more. And but secondly, obviously the transportation from oil resources like petrol resources in the cities have to go out regional, right? And so I saw there was some regional stations that was only allowing $20 top-ups for their petrol, which is crazy. But because I don't even know if that's a return trip in some of those regional places because they're quite a long drive. So it's really, I can sort of understand, but I don't know if that $20 limit was put on naturally because there's less oil petrol, or if that $20 limit was put on because everyone in Sydney is panic buying. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if it's similar to the toilet paper. It wasn't like a lack of toilet paper. It was just because everyone was panic buying toilet paper that all of a sudden it became like a scarce resource. So we're sort of manufacturing our own issue. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what the media does best, and to put things into perspective, the Strait of Hormuz, yes, it's a major line where fuel comes through, but still only supplies about 20% of the global oil market. So, and in saying that, we have a lot of oil generally in the whole world. Whether it's Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, even the Americans are really self-sufficient when it comes to oil. Australia has sort of been left behind because we basically export most of our stuff, which is insane. We have the resources, we have the uranium, we have the oil, we can be self-sufficient, but our governments, successive governments, not just the current one, has allowed this to happen. So I don't think we're running out of oil. I think that what's happening now is you've got the panic buying because
Hmm.
this is what everyone's focusing on.
Yeah, yeah. I
So
think like our governments in the past have tried to focus on sort of putting Australia on the map, and I think a lot of the public were a fan of that idea. The idea of us Australia playing in an international market, and it's helped us. It has helped us a little bit in the past, where we are. We had some strong economies in the past compared. We fared okay during COVID. We sort of play this international game, even though we're quite a small player in that international game compared to some of the others. And so I think even the Australian public and the government have sort of liked us, playing that international game. But now, when push comes to shove, and we realize we're actually not self-sufficient, when we probably could have been. And so it's actually going to take a lot to sort of wind back the clock and sort of say, okay, we're going to have this, more of an intrinsic internal policy when it comes to our resources. Because I think sort of the buck's left the station. Like, we're already got all these relationships where we're exporting most of our goods outside of Australia. So, which is a shame, but in saying that, we did get benefits from it, I guess, because we are playing into, that international trade game, which we probably wouldn't have if we'd been intrinsic before.
true, true. But this is going to have and the RBA meets next week. I think it's on the 16th, which is about a week away.
Yep.
So this actually may cause them not to raise rates, because what will happen is the price of fuel has gone up. So it naturally has put a driver, like a handbrake, sorry, on inflation, because people are naturally going to spend less. So in that instance, it may actually help the RBA in making a decision to sort of hold next week.
Yeah.
But I think 70 or 80% of the banks as of today are already saying that there's a guaranteed rate hike coming. So this is on top of the last one that happened last month.
Yeah.
And if you have a big mortgage, this is going to hurt.
It definitely is going to hurt, and you're actually right. I never thought of it in that perspective, but we were talking last podcast about how really the RBA's only got the single lever. They can only look at the environment and sort of say, okay, well, is rates going to be an effective lever to pull if inflation's too high or inflation's at target or whatever. And with price of fuel, maybe that's the lever, maybe that's pulled, but RBA doesn't have to do anything. Maybe it's already been pulled by another industry. So maybe we'll see. I don't know. I think that I don't know. I've got more of like a critical mind of the RBA, and part of me thinks that they like to be relevant as well, so they probably will pull the lever anyway, just so they can be the masters of inflation. So anyway.
True. Well, if they did their job back 2 years ago and put it up faster than what they did, and did what the rest of the world was doing, increased the handbrake quicker, then maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Forget about what happened with Iran. Iran happened in the last 2 weeks. But before that, and this is what Jim Chalmers is going to blame the interest rate hike on Iran, but rates are going up before Iran. Iran's a current issue that's just happened. But inflation was coming up because the RBA took too long to react. Because they took too long to react, inflation has creeped back in. And regardless, we were going to get another rate hike or a few, regardless of Iran or not. So Iran being there, the Iran oil issue may actually slow them down, but it could also work the other way, saying, well, things are going up too fast and we need to slow it down faster. And they may, have another reaction just to say, well, let's just increase it to see if we can slow it down.
Yeah, just really sort of drive it home that to stop spending. Now we have a few issues, and I wanted to chat to you about what the current environment will do for investors, because really, like the owner occupied market, I mean, it's getting harder for people to buy properties, but for investors, they're going to really feel the impact. And is it just you, or do you feel like, is it just me, or do you also feel like there's just so many different factors all happening at one time that's really, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, targeting investors and especially property investors? So I was thinking about it the other day in preparation for the podcast, and I was like, I could sort of name 5 off the top of my head. CGT, DTI, inflation, a few others, couple others, that are really aimed towards property investors. Now, if you're a property investor, what's your strategy in an environment like this where, property is still, bricks and mortar assets still a pretty good asset to have, especially come to retirement. It does, even with some dips and stuff through global events, it will still grow in value historically. What's your thoughts on how investors should play the current situation?
Well, when it comes to investing, especially long term, it always makes sense to be diversified between properties, stocks, and the rest of it. When, when it comes to these changes, like this is going to be a big change in May when the government releases the budget. Whatever they do, no one knows yet, but it's going to impact prices at some point. If, say, for example, they decide to get rid of the capital gains tax discount, which is what's been pushed out there at the moment, it's going to cause people to say, well, hey, if I sell now within the window, I can make more money instead of waiting for later on. And they will force people to sort of make moves. And that's what I think the government is trying to do, is to try and agitate the market a bit, because investors, especially property investors, which have made a hell of a lot of money, especially since COVID, the government's looking for cash. And property investors are the easiest target because you've got a lot of money within a sector which they can tax pretty easily, and they have the majority as well in Parliament.
And so it's all tied up in assets that aren't moving. So if they can start getting those assets to move, then there's more tax available, right?
It's more tax available, but it's also slushing the economy with more money, because if you sell an investment property, you're going to pay the real estate agent, the mortgage broker, and the rest of it, and it sort of just flows down. And that's what they need. They need things to continually move, so then they can make changes to the economy. When things stay stagnant the way they are, you've got a segment of the market who are property investors, which are really, really rich because they've got a lot of property. And then you've got the people trying to get into the market, which can't because they're just too expensive. The property prices are just way too expensive.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think when governments do big changes like this, yes, definitely something to look out for and something to take note of. But property as well is a long-term game. So if you're jumping into the property market, to make money over 2 or 3 years, these rules may make a difference in your decision-making process, your cash flow. But if you're thinking to keep the property for 10, 20, 30 years, as long as there's population increase and inflation, property prices should generally be okay.
Yeah, I'm always when people come to me and they talk about property investing and they're talking about buying a property and leveraging it for a few years, I always have sort of that internal feeling that that's probably not a good strategy. And again, it's sort of each their own, and different circumstances call for different strategies. But 2-3 years is probably just not enough. You know what I mean? It's like it's like the day trading version of property, property and stock. So it's like this idea of keeping it for 3 years, and people are like, well, should I buy now? Should I wait? And my thoughts on the current environment is that the same sort of principles apply, and it comes to affordability. And obviously, if you're not sort of crunching your budget to try to invest, I don't think investing's meant to be like that. But if it's something you can afford and you have a borrowing power and there are opportunities out there, you have to just be prepared that there may be slight corrections in different markets, property markets around Australia. But you're holding that property for a long term. If you're holding it for 3 years, then maybe reconsider a different strategy. Maybe look to shares, maybe look to something else that's maybe more liquid that you can sort of buy and sell relatively easily. But then not necessarily putting it into a property that, you have to pay stamp duty, then you have to pay the agent fees and, all the costs associated. And then in a 3-year period, sell that and have to pay the stamp duty and agent fees when you try and do it again, type of thing. So
look, for me, it's all about cash flow. If you're going in to buy an investment property and it's an expensive one and it's taking a lot of your disposable income after tax from your pocket, then you need to consider, well, hey, what happens if my life changes? What happens if I lose my job? What happens if I have kids? What happens if rates go up? You need to be also factoring these possibilities in your decision-making process before you actually buy the property. If you're going to buy a $1.5 million property and you're right on the edge, and you probably shouldn't buy it, but you just want to buy it because everybody else is buying it, that's probably not the best strategy, because like interest rates now, everyone's been talking about cuts up until probably October last year, the media, the market, everybody was saying that rates were going to get cut. We just had one increase. We could have another two or three. And there's surely going to be investors that bought on the edge with the intention of things getting cheaper, but it's gone exactly the opposite way. On top of that, cost of living has gone up. Things are more expensive. So all these factors need to be part of your decision-making matrix before you actually do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And investing needs to have that holistic approach. Otherwise, I think people get stuck into what's the media telling me? What are my friends doing? What's my uncle doing? What's everyone doing when it comes to their investments and their successes? And we'll try to replicate that. And that doesn't suit every single person because, like you said, it's got to do with cash flow, and every cash flow position is completely different one to another. Now, a quick question about your latest post. I saw your latest post about,
yes.
And you made a claim, which I'm usually reluctant to make these claims, especially being a mortgage broker. I usually don't like to sort of say, hey, you should, because I don't want to be the guy that says, hey, that mortgage broker told me I should and it didn't work out for me. It's a bit of a gamble. And you
Tell me,
said,
which post is this?
You said, consider fixing your interest rates in the current market. Now, I'm not going to say I'm against it. I'm just saying it's something that I usually avoid sort of telling my clients. But I think it's come to that time. I think it's come to that time where we had it just sort of during COVID and people fixed at a really low rate, and then they were like shouting it from the rooftops that they made a great investment decision when really just they lucked out. I think this is probably one of those times where we're looking at a fixed rate's probably a good idea. Yeah.
Well, it's coming to that point where like now the market and people in general are starting to realize that things are going to continue to go up. And to give you a bit of a backstory, I owned property as well back in 2007, 2008, and interest rates were continually going up and up and up. And I remember on an investor loan, I was paying about 9.5% to 10% interest back in 2007, 2008. And everybody at that same time was telling me to lock in a rate because it's going up. It's continually going up every single time they were meeting. But then we had the GFC happen. So then what happened was then rates absolutely got smashed down from 10% down to, I remember, like, I think 5 or 6%. So if I would have fixed at that point, then I would have been locked in for that period.
Yeah.
You know? And ever since then, rates have gone down, So looking back in hindsight, it was the correct decision. I probably made a lot of money by not fixing. But in saying that, that was at that point in time. It was a different time back then. Now we're talking about 2026. There is a lot more geopolitical risks that are going on, as the world can see. We also still have the Trump administration in power for the next 2 years as well. Plus, more likely than not, maybe the Republicans will stay in. So there's going to be a bit of a period of uncertainty that's going to happen. And this is where fixing is not so much to make money, but it's more to hedge your bets, to say, well, this is the mortgage payment that I'm paying this month at this fixed rate, and that's going to be the same repayment for the next 5 years, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, I like that strategy, and I speak to my clients about that, is that, it's a losing game when you try to bet against the market. Like, it's a losing game. If you're saying, I want a variable rate because I think rates are going to go down, the chances are rates will go up, and you'll pay for that. Or if you say, I want a fixed rate because I think that the rates will start to go up, all of a sudden rates go down for some reason or other. So like if you're lucky enough, you can sort of pick it right. If you're not lucky, but the features of a fixed rate versus the features of a variable rate is really what you should be looking at. Because as you mentioned, like with a fixed rate, sure, let's say rates go up or down, doesn't matter. Fixed rates, if you're happy with that amount, and you're okay for the next 3 years that you're paying that every month, and you've got that confidence of going, I know I can make that money, I know I can pay it back, cash flow perspective's good, then fixing is, it can be a suitable product because you're holding it, you know what the repayments are, and it doesn't matter what happens, it's locked in for 3-5 years or something like that. And variable rate, on the variable rate, the features of that is that you can make extra repayments. There's no break fees. You can, if you're thinking about selling a property or you want to keep it available for sale, if it comes down to a sort of crunch time, then you keep that on a variable rate, and you've got that flexibility. If you've got an offset account, usually that's a feature with the variable rate as well. So it really there's a few different things to think about, and I think gaming the market and trying to pick where rates are going to go is going to just end in tears, you know, because you unless you're lucky enough to guess right. That's always my thoughts. I sort of agree that the end decision should be mainly on you know, whether you're happy to hold those rates and hedge your bets like that. Maybe I'm always a fan of just putting your own occupied on variable rate anyway, just because you want to keep making those payments and pay that down. But the investment properties, maybe there's an argument to sort of say, okay, well, let's just fix those in, and we can afford the repayments and do stuff there. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm already getting a request, a bunch of people wanting to fix their rates at the moment, so that'll be interesting. We spoke last time about capital gains tax. Now you probably know this more than me. They release the budget. Then when does this usually come into effect? It doesn't come into effect day one of the budget, right? Usually they've got like a projected date.
Yes. Usually they do have a projected date, but who knows? You know, like Labor's obviously looking for cash. They need the cash because they're spending it really, really fast. So usually they have a grace period, and especially with the property prices, because they're so expensive and they're hard to exit the market, it takes time, it's illiquid. They most likely will put a date, probably the 1st of July the following year, usually. But in saying that, they could also do it from 7:30 p.m. on the day of the budget. So no one knows. It's anyone's guess when that will start. But I would assume that they would put some sort of honeymoon period just to give investors the opportunity to get out. And I think if the budget is in May, I think it's mid-May, to 30th of June is only 6 weeks. It's not going to be long enough to even sell property. So I think that's where they will give a full year. So the 1st of July the following year, but that's obviously not in stone.
Now, there's two sort of investor-centric policies that might come up in the budget. I think there's discussions about it. One of them is negative gearing. I think capped at 2 properties or something like that. I think that's the discussion. And then you've got the capital gains tax. I know that it's a bit of a mystery, but I'm sort of thinking that that will be reduced to 25%. I think that's, in my head, that's sort of like the leading case. What do you think?
Yeah, to me, it makes more logical sense for them to do the CGT discount, because when you limit the number of negatively geared properties, you're going to start impacting supply, because at the end of the day, the property is negatively geared because the expenses are greater than the income. So that's coming out of somebody's pocket, whether it's your pocket, my pocket, an individual's pocket is funding that property. So yes, there's a capital gain on the other side when they sell it, but in saying that, someone's paying. And I think if they start capping, then people are going to be going, well, if I buy my 3rd investment property and I don't get the negative gearing benefits, then what's the point of me buying it? Because I was buying it to get a tax benefit. If I'm not going to get that now, while it's still costing me cash flow every single month, why would I do that? So I think that's where they may shock the market if they touch negative gearing to any extent at the moment. I think they'll go on the other side and they'll go, well, capital gains tax discount is an easy one because you have bought a property for $500,000, you're selling it for $1 million. You still made money. Yes, you're going to be paying us more tax, but you're still going to be making money. You're not going to be impacting.
So you're saying they're probably only going to bring in one of those 2 policies. You don't think they're going to bring in both?
I don't think they'll shock the market with too many changes. Like with these sort of things, it's like if you do too many changes, it causes the market to freeze and people don't know what to do. And I think they don't want that to happen. They want the market to
they want it to move, right? Yeah.
They want it to keep going. So I think, and that's where if you start limiting property investors, well, they're going to stop investing. And if they stop investing, you're going to cause more of a housing issue, more of a supply issue, because there's no properties on the market for renters. So I think they're going to touch the capital gains tax, because who doesn't want to tax the greedy property investors that have made a ton of cash, right? And it looks good for them as well when they have to go to their base for voting.
I did mention on the other podcast though is that it is a bit sad because there's always talk about the age pension sort of fizzling out eventually. I sort of feel like by the time I get to 65, 67, there probably won't be an age pension,
It'll be gone.
It'll be gone. So we have to look in other alternatives, right? To sort of fund my retirement. I have to start thinking about property. I have to start thinking about shares, my own superannuation, getting that up to a standard that's going to be good for retirement. And so when I think about these policies that are coming in, like capital gains and stuff like this, I don't all of a sudden think about the greedy property investors. Surely there's a bunch of them out there, but I do think, and I mentioned this in our last podcast, I do think that there is a lot of Australians who are just trying to build a nest egg, right, for their retirement. And I feel like it's unfairly targeting them. Like, what if they're trying to put funds away so they're not relying on tax and they're not relying on the age pension and they're not relying on these social benefits, but instead they're relying on wealth that they've accumulated throughout their life that they paid for. They've had to pay interest, they've had to pay maintenance, they've had to pay agent fee. They've paid as they've gone, and then all of a sudden you're hitting with a massive tax come retirement when they try to sell the property to get access to that cash. I don't know. There is a part of me that sort of goes, well, that's that shouldn't be what it's for, but it might impact those people just as much.
Well, look, I think you and I have just come up with the strategy that they need to implement. Yes, cut capital gains tax discounts, but not for those who own properties within their SMSF. And then basically you can alleviate that to say, well, if you buy properties within your SMSF, they're clearly for your retirement.
For retirement, yep.
Or somehow do a law or rules to basically say if you sell any property that you own within your SMSF before you hit retirement, then you get the capital gains tax discount gets reduced. If it's over and you've already retired, then maybe CGT impact doesn't change. So there's so many things that they can tinker with. But yeah, that's probably a good, like, if the government's trying to push people towards funding their own retirement, then it makes sense to not tax those properties once they're retired. Yeah, maybe that's the strategy.
Oh, I completely agree. Well, there we go. We always fix the world problems in these podcasts.
100%.
No, look, that's good. I do know you need to head off. So, look, I think on that final strategy, that's our recommendation. We'll submit it to our local MPs now. But look, I'm happy with that discussion. I think there was sort of a lot in there. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months. Like I said, the last month, what we've seen already with petrol and stuff like this, that'll all probably fizzle out when people start to see what the normal is going to look like. But it'll be the next 6 months, next 12 months will be really interesting.
Well, it all depends on the war. If Trump says what he says, Trump says what he does, or does what he says, then he reckons the war will be over within 4 weeks from 2 weeks ago. So it looks like we're coming to an end if we align to that timeline. But with these things, who knows? It could go on.
I think there was
4 weeks, 6 weeks.
I think I saw an article. I don't know if I haven't fact checked it, but apparently was it a couple of days ago was the lowest amounts of missiles that Iran has sort of sent off, which is sort of indicative of maybe reduced stock, if that makes sense, of what's available. So maybe it might end a little bit quicker. I think America's come sort of all guns blazing, but Iran sort of responded all guns blazing. And I think maybe America has a little bit more stock than Iran. I don't know. We'll see.
Who knows? But look,
we'll see what happens.
Trump, he wants to make a deal, and I think that's what all this is for, because nobody wins in war. You lose lives, economies get wrecked, and the rest of it. They need to make a deal, and they need to come up to some sort of solution that keeps everybody happy, and just sort of to move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we'll see what happens. But Andrew, I appreciate you coming on today, and I'll let you go, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Catch you on the next one.
All right, thanks. Take care, mate. Bye.